The hunt. An alien squad goes hunting. Do you think it's hunting us again? Alke't asked as he scraped his small arm claws over part of his back carapace, his larger clawed arms in front of him ringing over themselves. A sign of nervousness in his chitin-clad species. A realization had set in of how it was ironic that they, the alpha predator on Henri, were being hunted. Rosert, his commander, gave him a glare. When the sun goes down it hunts. Watch each other's backs. No one goes off alone. We've lost enough soldiers and colonists already. We have to find this creature and stop it. This route is critical to the success of this colony. Alke't quieted down. Rosert was over 9 feet tall when he extended his chitin-clad legs, big even for the chta. His chitin carapace was such a dark blue it looked like a black mirror. He didn't like having his authority questioned. Between the losses to accidents and this monster, everyone felt helpless. The captain was at the point of violence. He had lost much of his command to a beast that stalked them in accidents. Alke't could feel his chitin clatter in fear, an all too common feeling of late. His squad of 5 had drawn patrol tonight. This monster had plagued this colony since it landed. Every night they tried to protect the colony, every night they lost more of the soldier class. Then when the daylight came, the poor colonists would try to build up more, but there was always an accident. Far too many died in bizarre accidents. None believed it to be pure chance, but no one ever saw exactly what happened. None would voice that they thought it was the beast. That frightening thought would imply that it was more than a beast hunting them. Sitting at the base of a valley, the wall they had erected around the colony felt more a pen than protection. Each time a patrol disappeared, or an accident killed more of them, it put those remaining more on edge. They had been there 3 months and already lost 50 soldiers and 200 civilians. Alke't was dwelling on this as the gates of their wall creaked open, the moans of the alloy slide in its tracks sounding like lost souls to his shattered nerves. More proof of the haste in which they had put together this construction. He could still pick up on the vague scent of burning oil that clung to the air from the fuel dump accident this morning. 10 chta had died in that one. He had been resting in the barracks when it happened. He couldn't forget how their dark blue chitin carapaces bleached white from the heat. He had helped in the struggle to put out the fire. Later, in bitterness, he reflected on how they had felt it had been an ideal location. They had placed the colony next to a river that in a dozen or so miles emptied into one of this planet's oceans. There was with a mountain pass behind it an old-growth forest on either side. They had easily wiped out the human colony that was already there in a surprise attack. The last light of the cycle flickered as the sun went behind the mountains. As the light played across the open field outside the wall, Alke't could feel his dread rising. Soon, the only light would be from the 2 moons' faint glow. The air temperature was starting to drop. With the chilled bite it blew across the patrol, there was a scent like impending rain. Looking back, Alke't felt relieved they could still see the safety of the walls. He again cursed this system's lack of a second sun that would illuminate the whole cycle. He wished he could get his claws on that intelligence officer. Bastard has sat there and told them this planet was a near garden planet, no large natural predators. Yet, here they were, stumbling around blind in the pitch blackness of night, looking for a predator. They had tried erecting large spotlights to illuminate the forest. Around the colony, they held off the inky blackness and the danger it brought. It wouldn't matter though, someone would still die, he thought. He knew his outlook was grim. He did his best to hide it from his squad. As his squad began their patrol they would be going into the eastern woods. He knew this would take him through the charred ruins of the human colony. He could feel his fear building. He always felt he was being watched. The entire way through that part of the patrol, thinking of it he felt his chitin start to clatter. They were far enough now, he couldn't see the colony. Only the faint glow in the dark from their lighting gave any sign where the colony was. Seeing the human ruins, Alke't's mind wandered to Alke't. His friend had researched humans some after this monster started stalking the colony. Alke't's theory was one of the dead humans had come back because they hadn't disposed of them in the proper manner. Problem with researching humans is you never know what is real, and what isn't. The humans had entire classifications for undead and spirits. That didn't even include those from their many religious beliefs. It didn't help Alke't though. He had disappeared from a patrol the night after they had discussed it. They had found most of him the next morning. Alke't knew his thoughts were grim and he felt distracted. Not a good way to start this patrol. Alke't had found lists of everything from zombies to blood-sucking monsters. He insisted that dead humans could become any of many types of monsters. Alke't had laughed at him then, buzzing his chitin. Now he was wishing to study those findings closer. He again found himself thinking about their landing. He had been part of a squad involved in the slaughter of the humans that had been here. The strike had been perfect, they caught the humans by surprise. They hadn't been able to put up a struggle as their fighting vehicles rolled over houses. Those trying to run burned down with plasma fire. Turning up his lights, he shuddered at the shadows casting such horrid darkness. This creature could be anywhere. The creature was savage and intelligent, that was certain. More than a couple times, an entire patrol never returned. Those who did tell of soldiers vanishing into the dark, so fast no one even got a light on them. They only caught glimpses of fur if they ever saw anything. And of the traps, the creature would put out along their path. He still hadn't forgotten the death of his predecessor as the squad leader. A tree trunk had fallen on him, crushing him and 2 other members of the patrol. It hung over the trail, a hidden rope had triggered it, awaiting the unfortunate. Alke't had been lucky enough he was behind them. The sickening crunch and warm spray of their bioluminescent blood as it hit him, that would forever haunt his nights. However many he had left, he grimly thought. They were about halfway through the human ruins now. Alke't knew this wasn't the worst part. While the human ruins set a dismal scene, he knew real terror awaited him in the forest. Soon he would hear the beast's noise as it began to stalk them. The certainty that some of the squad members would die was already making him sick. The rest of the patrol was showing signs of their nervousness too. But the command was desperate. No matter the losses, they would keep sending squads to hunt this beast. And of course, hunting the beast when it was moving was what leadership felt was best. Too bad they aren't out here doing it, Alke't thought, bitterness so deep he could almost taste it. Poor Pult was on point, his chitin was clattering so hard Alke't could hear it. His fear louder than even the rustle the leaves made in the night breeze. That's when they heard the beast. The sound was reminiscent of a warning klaxon. A long, loud bo-ho-oh. Sometimes the first one would last up to 30 seconds, reverberating through the valley. Alke't knew all in the colony heard it. Many in the colony felt it was the sound of stolen spirits begging for release. None could sleep through that horrible noise. Alke't again wondered how this colony had gone so wrong. They had started out with 2,000 civilians with about 200 soldiers. They had a standard seed colony set up, with emergency provisions and protection. He remembered the shock of finding a human colony of about 500 here. They had deployed their soldiers in a swift noon raid. They had not even lost 20 men. Humans could be fierce fighters, but their surprise was complete. He remembered how on the first few days, watching the sun glimmer off the river, he had thought it a perfect colony site. As his patrol approached the woods, he could feel the fear creeping into his veins. He realized he had never felt fear on this level before. They were conquerors. Yet now he felt more like prey. He wondered if this monster had plagued the humans. It likely only turned its attention to the Ch'ta once it ran out of easy prey. As they walked their assigned patrol path, the darkness of the woods seemed to try and swallow them, their lights fighting to keep the tendrils of inky blackness at bay. In the dark, he could hear the calls of the various creatures that called the dark home. The occasional sudden movement in the brush would make the entire squad jump. Then, they would hear that dreaded beast's bahoo again, always closer. The smell of Pult fear gland was not helping the situation. The alien forest had underbrush that was multi-hued. It played tricks on their eyes in the bright lights, reflecting back dizzying arrays of color. As the chill began to set in, he could feel his body function slow. Were it not for the heated suits, he would have shut down by now. He forgot all that as another bahoo resounded like it was right next to him. The whole squad's fear glands emptied at that. With no other choice, they went deeper into the forest. A sudden crash in the brush next to them caused Pult to fire his plasma rifle blindly into the woods. Something small and dense was moving fast. Everyone followed his lead. None of them hid in the dark. Then the creature ran through their lights across the trail. It was one of the human domesticated farm animals that had fled during their attack. A pig, he seemed to recall. The whole squad started making the buzzing reverberation of their chitin. It was a sign of relieved humor among the Ch'ta. As the humor died down, he looked back to tell Tarlk, who was bringing up the rear, about Pult's folly. That's when he realized Tarlk was gone, vanished at that moment. Alke't was mere feet away and had never even heard a sound. Immediately they went into a defensive circle, calling out for Tarlk. Alke't hoped the young soldier had stepped off the trail and would respond. He knew it wasn't likely though. In the darkness, he heard a methodical snapping. The sickening noise of chitin crunching and breaking. Alke't signaled his squad forward, spread out in a fan formation. Their lights aimed towards the source of the noise. As they wandered further into the woods though, the snapping fell silent. They didn't find Tarlk, but they found a trail of the bioluminescent blood his species had. Alke't halted his squad, then ordered everyone to turn off their lights. The entire section of the forest they were in glowed, covered in the faint green. Again a rustle and crashing in the underbrush. They swung towards it, turning on their lights to only shoot at another of those pigs. He realized to his horror that the pig's face was glowing as it tore off through the underbrush. They couldn't hit it in the darkness. Then, they heard another baho. He wished he could say they headed back the trail with calm decorum. Reality is that ran as fast as they could. Their lights on, the 4 remaining members started moving down the trail. They were far more intent on finishing the patrol than actually finding anything. Alke't actually hoped he didn't find anything else. And as quick as it happened, everything was quiet again. As they started moving down the trail, Pult turned towards Alke't to ask a question. Alke't never heard the question. He heard the snap of a branch breaking. Then a log came flying by where Pult had stood, leaving a faint green splatter. He remembered how Pult's light created a surreal flashing effect as it tumbled through the air. It broke, it struck something. The log came back, unlike Pult, swinging from the trees above. One end of it glowing a faint green. Alke't could smell his own fear gland empty again, something he didn't realize was even possible. The Alke't and his 2 remaining squad members stood there and stared at the log, not sure if they should run back the way they came or continue on. They were over halfway through their patrol, deep in the woods now. The trees blocked any view of the light from the colony. Alke't and Skirf looked to Alke't, their fear clears in the clacking of their chitin. Alke't knew staying there wasn't an option. Let's keep going, it's shorter than going back. Alke't on point, keep your eyes open for traps. They had not heard any more of the monster's calls. Every so often one of them would claim to have seen a glimpse of fur. They felt like the woods were alive with watching them. Both soldiers nodded. Racked moved forward taking point while Skirf pulled rear guard. The rest of the way through the forest, nothing happened, though they all flinched with each branch that snapped or call of the nocturnal animals. Alke't felt a sense of extreme relief as the forest began to thin. They were coming out next to a cliff on their left side. Rakt even seemed to pick his pace up some as they approached the edge of the forest. Alke't looked back, making sure Scurf was still with him. When he felt the crash of something hitting the ground in front of him before careening into the woods, even as he turned, he knew Rakt was gone. He had felt the bioluminescent blood splatter on him when it had happened. Pieces of Rakt chitin remained along with a faintly glowing stain in the trail. He could see the boulder that had gone by in the woods, glowing a faint green. Bahuo! With that cry, and seeing the colony ahead, Alke't and Scurf took off running towards its safety. Scurf never made it. Alke't never saw what happened to him. When he had reached the light, he was calling in panic for anyone to open the gates. As they did, he remembers looking back and seeing something. He didn't get a good look but saw it covered in fur. Its eyes had reflected the light, no light seemed needed. It was dragging something dark and still into the woods. Alke't feared it was Scurf. Entering the gate was the last thing he remembered. Alke't awoke to a horrible kaboom. The whole medical building shook with enough violence to throw him out of the medical pod he was in. For a moment, he was sure the building would collapse. He stumbled out of the temporary building to look at what he already knew to be true. They had their ship about a half-mile east of the colony, near where his patrol had been. It held their vehicles, most of their food stores, and was their only form of off-planet communications. That ship should have been empty by now, but the daily accidents and the nightly beast hunts had slowed everything to a crawl. The first thing Alke't saw was the walls were down and much of the forest lay flattened or on fire. Many of the structures around the colony had collapsed when the shock wave had hit. Everywhere he looked, Ch'ta were running around. They were trying to fight the fires and save those trapped in the rubble. The ship, with the bulk of their supplies, was gone. Alke't felt numb. Even with all the activity he heard nothing. It wasn't even fear, it was like his mind was shut down. It was the slow realization that they would all die on this planet. Either from the nightly monster or starvation. Alke't realized he was on the ground. He didn't remember falling but it didn't matter. None of it did. Robert entered the cave with Max, his bloodhound. He pulled the blind he used to hide it back in place. As he took off the fur hat and jacket, he again marveled at how smooth and soft the fur was. He had made them from the skin of the small mammals that lived near the river. To him, they looked like giant water rats. His wife had always tried to correct him, making him all the more determined to call them that. Her memory brought a smile to his weary face. He put his hatchet away and tossed 4 more chitin plates on the pile in the corner. He started a small fire, the smoke hole hidden from easy view, then put a pot on to boil, throwing the Ch'ta legs and arms he had collected in. Robert set to task preparing some vegetables he had managed to cultivate in the forest. Robert was still amazed by how much the Ch'ta tasted like a crab. Max went to his corner and curled up on the mat Robert had made for him. The hound knew he would get some of the meal. As he finished his meal, he gave part of it to Max. Then he headed to the bed he had made himself. A picture of his wife with their son and daughter sat next to it. He sat down and looking towards it, "Sarah, I got a few more of the dung beetles today. I realized I had been thinking too small sneaking into their camp. Tonight I managed to get to their ship. I took the stabilizing rods out of their engine, heard it blow about an hour ago." Robert sat there, a tear running down his face as he thought about how beautiful his wife had been. Their little boy Kevin and daughter Jasmine had made him so proud. He had thought they would have a bright future at this small colony. Sarah had at first protested but gave in to his insistence this world was safer than Earth. He felt that cold hatred come back as he remembered coming home from that hunt. His home burned with the bodies of his family inside. The whole colony was dead and burning. The Ch'ta had killed them without mercy or provocation. The only survivors were a few others who were out hunting like him. The chitin plates being their form of currency. Looking back at the picture, "I know I'll probably join y'all soon, honey. But I promise you, those bastards will pay for what they've done. Up until the end, I'll make them pay." With that, he lay down to sleep off another long night of hunting.